Cool. Hi, sorry, I'm going to keep doing that. I'm using that. Hi, I'm Ruth, and this is Marcus, and we run a vegan education group in Lincoln. And we also do a radio show called The Species Barrier, which is vegan, and it focuses on both veganism and environmental issues. And before we started it, we started thinking probably, well, between 5 and 8 years ago, about the link between human population and animal rights.
Okay, so there we can see the current population estimate as of recently. You can see how many people we're adding to the planet every day, which is 230,000 rapid deaths. We can also talk here about sustainability and what it means to be sustainable. So the Global Footprint Network estimate that it will take about 2 billion people for us to be sustainable. There's a book called Green Vegans, they suggest 1 billion. Some people will even say 500 million would be the optimal figure, but obviously we're far from sustainable right now. And you have to ask yourself the question, what does it mean to be sustainable? And how much of the Earth are we due as just one species among millions?
So why does human population even matter apart from the sustainability question? I mean, it affects all of us, and that includes both human animals and non-human animals, and of course the new human who will come into being. So
you can see in this cartoon, there's various groups that are applauding the guy for keeping a taboo around population. And obviously we get some stigma, it's a right-wing issue, it's eugenics, and all these other lazy associations for what is an ecological issue. Even the film Cowspiracy has like a little segment that downplays population. It's a great documentary otherwise, but there's no need to separate consumption from population when they're two sides of the same coin, and exactly how we work out human impact.
So how population affects other animals? Humans have hugely disproportionate demands that are unrivaled by other animals. We're one animal in millions, but the basic needs on this slide are really only scratching the surface. And even vegans, a lot of people say that if we're vegan it would be a problem, but even vegans at our best require fuel, energy, finite resources, housing, land for agriculture, clean water, and they'll all have impacts on wild animals who have seen their numbers halve in the last 40 years while our numbers have doubled.
Okay, so this chart shows how species extinctions go up accordingly to our population. It's been called the 6th great extinction event in history, and it's not asteroids or volcanoes this time, it's actually just one species, us, that's driving the species extinction event. They're going extinct at 1,000 to 10,000 times the standard rate, 200 species a day, and yeah, we're to blame.
It's quite a good cartoon because we call other species overpopulated. I think rabbits are probably one of the majority, the ones we like to call overpopulated, and we enact tolls whenever they interfere with human enterprises, be it badgers and dairy cows, or the persecution of birds of prey, because they're affecting the pheasant shooting industry. We've really messed around so badly with the ecosystem that all the apex predators of Britain and a lot of parts of the world have gone, and whereas we're left with the herbivores, and then we decide the herbivores are overpopulated and we'll cull them. And it's the same for animals such as recently in the last few days, they're saying they're now going to be culling foxes and hackney, because they're affecting us, not because then they're trying to say it's affecting deer, but they've then, part way down the article, so actually they're a danger to humans. Meanwhile, as we said earlier, humans are driving the 6th great extinction. This picture is of Mexico City. These hills were previously habitat for other animals, and be it urban sprawl or land for agriculture, we're consuming their habitats.
Okay, so this is a biomass chart. It shows about 12,000 years ago that all animals on the planet would have been considered wild. And now, as time has gone on, that green section has got smaller and smaller until you see the future projection where it becomes like the thinnest sliver. And the blue section is the domesticated animals we keep, so that's the farmed animals as well as dogs and cats, etc. and the growing red section is us.
Just an interesting graphic there. So, this is quite interesting. It's sort of looking at projecting, saying we all have the same demand per person, and if the numbers increase up 10 billion, and those numbers are outdated now, they're looking at 11.2 billion by 2100. And these numbers also don't include all the sea animals who are killed. But as the demand increases, as our population increases, the number of other animals slaughtered, pigs, chickens, etc., is going to vastly increase. And animal products in a lot of places that are now developing or are seen as an aspirational thing. In order to eat them, you're considered wealthy.
Okay, so there's the religious phrase, be fruitful and multiply. Meanwhile, the resources are finite. So if we do keep growing infinitely on a finite planet, it's not going to be easy to distribute fairly between the people. And seeing as we don't distribute fairly now between people, how would it be any easier at 8 billion, 10 billion, 12 billion, etc.?
You may have heard the phrase the housing crisis, but really it's a population crisis. Even if we seized and redistributed the empty houses, which is, I'm sure you'd agree, highly unlikely, it would only be a temporary sticking plaster for the demands. I mean, last year alone, in England, we lost 5,000 acres of protected greenbelt land that was reclassified, and they built land on it. We also added a city of Manchester worth of people last year, and England is now the most overcrowded major city in Europe, and it's the second overall to the tiny Malta. The alternative, people say, well, why don't we build on brown belt land? The thing with brown belt land is actually, it's a haven for rare invertebrate species, and actually you can have as many as ancient woodlands. So while it may not seem as fancy as these beautiful wild meadows, it's actually just as important for biodiversity, with their numbers also having halved.
So here we're covering food sustainability issues. We're showing how there's only 100 harvests, according to one study, left in the UK soil. But also how we are only 40% food sufficient in the UK, and how we're using agricultural land for housing, etc. That leaves us totally dependent on food imports. So we have to take resources from other countries. And as climate change and drought exacerbate food scarcity, that food source isn't going to be there forever. People will start to want to keep their food in their own countries.
This is from the National Geographic magazine, and it looks at the land that we've already developed, and basically only undeveloped land, as you can see on your left, is forests, high mountains, tundra and desert. So out of that, the only land you really can develop is forests, and that's where other animals live. So, like I said earlier, we're given a disproportionate share of this planet. We are just one species. And for us to think we have the right to take all the land from the other animals is just completely bonkers.
So this might show a familiar image to a lot of you. You might see green areas around you becoming housing. You might see a lot of building sites going on around you. It's just the so-called march of progress that's forever marching on. This image is showing the vanishing habitat for other animals. We've constantly begun to fence them to ever smaller areas. They don't have corridors connecting these regions, and that's a key driver in their extinctions. Here is a patron of the Population Matters charity, Chris Packer. He's just making the point that if you don't protect that habitat, then it's a doomed cause. You can give money to a wildlife charity, but they need somewhere to live at the end of the day.
Now going to more anthropocentric points. Really, the headlines are not looking good. According to a NASA-funded study, they found that industrial civilization has really a few decades until it collapses. So that's within, well, hopefully within our lifetime. I'm not sure hopefully is the right word there, to be honest. And also, many experts believe that runaway climate change is now locked in, and the 2 degrees targets, there's absolutely no hope of them being met. And even if they are, we're still looking at catastrophic climate change. We've put a lot of these, the studies and the information on a handout, which we'll put out at the end. Also, I think a really important study is the fact we're going to ecological overshoot at an earlier point every year, and this year it's actually 6 days earlier than 2014.
So, lots of people here will have seen Cowspiracy. Like we said earlier, it's a great documentary, but it does have that one segment which plays it off against population issues. And obviously, you can't separate consumption and population. We can't say we're not overpopulated because we could behave in a different way. We might want the world to go vegan, but as we currently behave and as we predictably will behave in the future, we are overpopulated.
So a lot of people also say we just have one or two, but the thing is we're not salmon. We don't reproduce and then die. We reproduce and we live alongside our ever-growing descendants as they continue. So you might live alongside your children, your grandchildren, possibly even your great-grandchildren, and you're all simultaneously having impacts on the planet. And you've got to remember those of us who are choosing to have love, family sizes, or not choosing not to have children at all. Those who choose to have children, yours are going to be on top of those who are choosing to have as many as they want. So yours aren't just, you might be making a decision just to have one, but they may be having 4, 5, etc.
Okay, so this is a quote by Albert Bartlett, and we highly recommend researching exponential growth. If you look him up on YouTube or look at David Suzuki, there's some great information to be found on exponential growth. And I'm going to give you some slides now which explain it a little. Okay, so we're going to go from 11 o'clock till 12 o'clock and fill this jar. So at 11 o'clock we've got the first cell of bacteria. And then we go from a duplication to another duplication and so on. So we were at 8 cells in that cell. So the jar, like our planet, is finite. So they've consumed the jar at the supposed time of 12 o'clock. So now we're going to ask, when would it be half full? At 11:30, would we expect the bacteria to have filled half the jar? That's the question. And the answer is no, it was half full with just 1 minute to go. So it's 11:59, the doubling effect of exponential growth. Ever more bacteria, producing ever more bacteria, meant that there was just 1 minute to go until the whole jar was consumed.
Obviously, a number of our environmental situations similar. Like Marcus mentioned, we live on a finite planet and we also have finite resources. There's a really interesting quote from David Attenborough. It says, anyone who believes in infinite growth on a finite planet is either mad or an economist. Sadly, the vast majority of people in the world seem to agree with that, including politicians. Seem to disagree with that, I'm sorry, including politicians. They seem to think that we can continually grow our economies, etc. And think how success is measured. It's measured by GDP. This graph is fairly old and it pictures us below 7 billion. The predictions though are scarily accurate and shows how exponential growth works. And this puts us at 10 billion by 2050, 9 billion by 2050, but actually we'll be at 10 and 11.2 by 21. This is by Author Edward Abbey, and it just makes total sense and actually quite a scary photo.
So, as we said earlier, we can't just replace ourselves with the fantasy animal that we would like us to be. We have to look at how we actually behave. If we were to reduce our consumption by 25%, which would be miraculous basically, the 50% rise in population, which is predicted, will still cancel out all the gains we've made. That could be veganism or any other kind of consumption and pollution.
And then again, obviously capitalism. The fact is that other systems such as socialism, while they may be better for humans, actually sharing the same resources just more fairly amongst other humans, and they're not taking into account the problems of growth, industrial pollution, and harm to other animals. And also, we are currently in a capitalist system. Again, the likelihood of us suddenly not being in that, if you look at the parties that would advocate that, they're not exactly popular at the moment. So you are just producing another consumer form, basically, for the coal. I personally like this image a lot. So it really just shows us as humans this sort of an industrial machine chasing other species off the planet as we believe it belongs to us.
So, would we all go extinct if we did this? And no, this is just some conscientious people arming themselves with information and making their decisions accordingly. They're not going to be a vegan world overnight, just as we're not going to deal with population overnight. All we can hope is to reduce the population growth somewhat. And the current prediction for 2100 is 11.2 billion people. Or maybe if we act now and talk about this issue, then it can turn out to be lower than that.
Is anyone here born to vegan parents? I wish. Yeah, me too. There you are. Me neither, but we're both vegan. And I don't know how many of you guys in here are vegan. I guess quite a high percentage. The way vegans are made, quote unquote, is by events like this. By getting out there, going to the West Midlands Vegan Festival, the Great Northern Vegan Festival, VegFest, you know, all the little fairs that all these awesome vegans are putting on out there and showing people how awesome veganism is and that it's possible. You can do that, or you can spend 18 years raising one child. Yes, you may have the energy to do a little bit of both, but it takes a lot of energy to raise a child. Also, will the child actually decide to be an ethical vegan at the end of it? We do a vegan radio show, like I mentioned. Our second ever episode was on vegan children. We interviewed 4 kids. 3 of them are no longer vegan. One of them wants to drink cow's milk. His mum won't let him, he's 6. Because peer pressure. Peer pressure is an amazing thing. Society is an amazingly, we look around, the adverts, McDonald's, you know, but prime rib from Morrison's. It's everywhere. And unfortunately, it's really hard to raise anyone with the same values. And like we've all rebelled, children are very likely to do exactly the same. And sadly, that's what's happened. But obviously, there's no denying that people have maternal instincts. But the way I look at it is, I love dogs. I absolutely adore them. I'm a bit mad about dogs. My biggest thing is I love Rottweilers. I grew up with them. I think they're the cutest puppies on earth. But does that mean as a vegan I should go buy one for a breeder? I don't think so. What can I do? I can go on a breed-specific waiting list. I can think and go, actually, do I really need to adopt a Rottweiler? Or I could foster. And that's the same with humans. There are so many children in care waiting for homes, desperate for homes. Around Sheffield, we live near Sheffield, and there's posters after poster begging for foster homes, begging for people who are open-minded and want to bring a child into their lives. I'm adopted, and it's you know, I have no problems. And people say, well, adopted kids are, you know, broken, or they've got problems, or they've come from problematic homes, and it's just offensive. And also, you've got to think, if you do adopt a child, not only are you not adding to the overpopulation problem, but there is a hope that child will be vegan. There's the same hope as with the biological child. They may not, but if they're not, at least the likelihood is they wouldn't have been anyway. This is just an interesting slide saying we really need to care for those who are already here. And with cats and dogs, you know, there's no difference. It's speciesism to think we're any different than anyone else. And how can we say, oh, you mustn't ever go to a breeder, but you're actually okay for people to, you know, to add your own humans?
Okay, so this graph is just showing the average mineral intake of a American citizen But we'll be similar on a sliding scale. Obviously, Americans tend to consume most, but this isn't even factoring in our need for land, our need for clean water, all the other consumptive goods we do, just minerals alone.
Yeah, big one. Do we hate children? No. No, I don't. The fact is, more humans leads to worse conditions. That's conditions for all of us. And also, it's conditions for the added child. There's going to be less resources per person, there's going to be more competition, and there'll be more warfare.
Okay, so obviously we're not calling for any culling to go on. We would say though that we can change attitudes, so a parent needn't feel judged by a message like this. It's just information to take into the future. Just looking to shift cultural attitudes as much as anything, and how we react and how we recommend regarding family sizes in the future. So who will take care of you is quite a selfish reason for adding a new human to the planet. And growing because we've already grown this like a Ponzi scheme, and it's very unsustainable.
The one-child policy in China. Probably the question we got asked, possibly the most when we were doing non-vegan events. That was due to cultural bigotry against females. I grew up in Hong Kong. Hong Kong did not have the one-child policy. Hong Kong does have a massive bigotry towards females. It's considered a much better thing to have a male child. Obviously, you've got to think, if it hadn't happened, and absolutely not saying that people should be killing females, it's absolutely disgusting, but if it hadn't happened, you're talking about an extra 500 million people. And that's goodbye to sharks, tigers, elephants, rhinos, and hello to an extra coal power station every single week, which is what they add.
So as vegans, we will hear, isn't it just a personal choice? Isn't it a personal choice for me to eat animal products? And then we can also say if something has impacts on others, which adding a human to the planet definitely does, it impacts all of us, then is it still just merely a personal choice?
So what do we do? The UN projections on population are pretty grim, but if we act and campaign on the information, then we can spread a new message. As a woman, I'm often asked, so when are you having kids? And when I say I'm not, I get this look of almost pity. I think that's the only way I can describe it. And that needs to change. It shouldn't be considered a bad thing. Oh, your husband won't let you have kids. Oh, that's so awful. Excuse me, what? There's also a real distrust, also a suspicion around people, and especially women, who don't want to have children. We're seen as less or not maternal, and therefore we're not caring, we can't be compassionate. So obviously what can we do? But by increasing women's rights worldwide, as you increase women's rights, the number of children they have in a family decreases. Also, comprehensive sex education, and this is worldwide. America has some horrific sex education policies, and they've proven time and time again when they have these abstinence-only programs, they absolutely don't work, and they end up with huge teen pregnancies. Also, free family planning. We're very lucky in the UK that we have this, but lots of places worldwide don't. And as far as I'm concerned, I think it should be available for everyone. It's a very important issue. And again, changing the cultural celebration that surrounds adding the new human.
And this means very much about not celebrating the addition of the new human. Right now that seems very bad and it seems very harsh a statement, but it is going to be these kind of shifts in attitude that will be necessary in order to make these changes.
The Population Media Centre and Population Speak Out put out a really interesting book, which we've got down on Population Matters stall. It's called Overdevelopment, Overpopulation, Overshoot, or Over. It starts with a load of essays by some very interesting people talking about how we've affected the planet and how both population and consumption, etc., are affecting the planet. And then it goes on to be sort of a picture book with quotes on each picture. And I don't know how they did it, to be honest. It's absolutely out of this world. You can see the whole book free online, which is at populationspeakout.org. That's also on the handout. And it's just really interesting. I can't recommend it enough. And if you have a local library or a group who would be interested and would use it, they will send you a copy for free. There's Population Matters store downstairs, and again, please check out the book over. I've got a handout, I'll just grab them out in a second. And finally, everyone's favourite naturalist, Attenborough. I think he's one of the patrons of Population Matters, and he speaks a lot about population nowadays. And he's another example of a parent who now understands overpopulation and speaks to share the message. But there's no major problem that wouldn't be easier to solve if there were fewer people. No problem that doesn't become harder and ultimately impossible to solve anymore. But like he says, there's a taboo on the subject.
Has anyone got any thoughts or questions about the information or anything else? Just on board with it. There's no,
Yes.
Speaking to the converted then. Oh, great. If anyone wants to come up and get some of these handouts we've got, then I'll put them out. Brilliant. Thank you for coming.